What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Christian Labasco podcast. Today, I've got somebody who needs no introduction, Taylin Simmonds. In case you haven't heard of him, Taylin Simmonds has 80,000 Twitter followers, has scaled a ghostwriting agency to 50 or $500,000 in annual revenue, and is a master at personal branding. Before coming to Twitter, he was a college music teacher and real estate investor. And Taylin quit his teaching job once he was making $40,000 a month and left to grow his agency and personal brand full time. I'm super honored to have him as a guest on the podcast. How are you today, Taylin?
Dude, I'm doing pretty good. That's a killer intro, so thank you.
Of course. So, who would you say are the people you look up to the most in the creator economy today?
Probably the people that you wouldn't consider to be in the creator economy as much. I think the creator economy is a bit of a bubble sometimes, especially on like a per platform basis. Where on Twitter, it's like Dan Coe, Justin Welsh, and those guys. On LinkedIn, it's like Lara, Yasmin, and people like that. So I really look up to Naval, Mark Manson, James Clear, the guys who are playing the online creator game on just a huge, like, big scope.
I love that. What would you say are like some of the biggest lessons you've learned from those two, Naval and Mark Manson?
Well, I think probably the single biggest lesson I've learned from both of them is to just distill knowledge and information through your own experiences and your own perspective. For example, Naval has this quote, happiness is the space between your thoughts. And it's just so profound that is something that someone could only think of if they had experienced, being happy and then thought about what is the common thread of all
Yeah.
my happy moments. And I see stuff like that with Manson too, where he'll take just really crazy psychological ideas and he'll find these interesting concepts or ways to market them or to
Mhm.
say them. And in the marketplace of ideas, that might be one of the single most powerful skills that a marketer and a writer could develop.
Yeah, like Naval's productize yourself, that concept has been like
Mhm.
expanded onto like the end of the earth by many people at this point. So definitely very
Yes.
powerful. What would you say was the moment when you realized that the creator economy was legit for earning an income and freedom? Mhm.
Yeah. I kind of laughed when you sent me this question ahead of time. I was like, you know what? It was just when I made my first dollar online. I know that before I made it, my belief that it was possible was just significantly less. If I actually kind of thought it was impossible. I'm like, oh, these other people have made all this money online, but are they scammers? Are they just young 20-year-olds who are doing some like weird shady stuff?
Yeah.
Like I didn't even think online business was legit. And it wasn't until I made my first dollar online, which I think happened to be an invoice of 3,000 US or something like that. It was pretty substantial. I was like, whoa, I just made a month's salary in one client. Holy
Yeah.
crap. And it was absolutely insane. So that to me was the big aha moment where I'm like, whoa, this is actually possible. I just got to do more of this.
How far into the game did you make your first dollar online?
It was about 6 months in. So 6 months of working a 9 to 5, posting every single day, having stuff totally flop, being confused as hell, having no
Mhm.
idea how to make the money. It was a grind, but I'm happy I did it.
Yeah, I remember on the Jack Moses podcast, you talked about how you had a ghostwriting client who was really unreasonable and you weren't getting paid for it, and they would like text you in the middle of the night that you had to finish a thread for them in the next hour. Was that before your first dollar?
Yeah. That was a few months before the first dollar. Yep. Ghostwriting for free. Guy lived in the UK. I lived in Western Canada. It's like an 8, 9 hour time difference. Like 3, 4 in the morning, he would call me. Hey, we need like 2 threads immediately. I would get up so tired. I would write them so slow. Sometimes just even sitting in bed. I would go to bed with my laptop beside me and I would just sit there, laptop between my knees, just like, kind of like writing these threads. And the second I would hit send and he's like, these are good. I can work with these. I would just like close my laptop, go back to bed for like 4 hours and then go to
Wow.
work.
That's
So it was pretty brutal.
that's impressive though, because most people definitely would have quit. I mean, especially since you weren't getting paid for that kind of effort of waking up in the middle of the night. So I feel like that's something that probably has contributed to your success is that persistence, even though you'd probably be better if you never did that, but it built your persistence. Like if you were able to do that for nothing, then you kind of built that muscle of ghostwriting.
Definitely. And it got me the social proof. That was why I did it. For anyone who might be thinking, why the heck would somebody actually do that and just do all that work for free? It's because so once you have social proof, then you can charge, and it's so much easier to close clients. And he was the only person that would let me write for free for him. And his, he was posting it and it was actually going viral, and I knew what accounts. So I was screenshotting all the metrics of the things I wrote. And by the time I actually got around to getting some leads, I was like, hey, look at all these results I have. So even though it was so much work, it ended up getting me past the step that a lot of beginners get stuck on, which is that they just don't have any results or social proof.
Yeah, it was, you had to sort of delay the gratification of putting all the work in up front to get the exponential growth. Because if you didn't have that client, you might have never made your first dollar online with that next client.
Exactly.
This is a question for my grandma. She listens to all of my podcasts and sports me, but she doesn't fully understand how someone can make an income writing online, like how you thought it was a scam until you actually did it. Do you mind explaining how you can make like multiple 5 to 6 figures a month by writing online and building a brand?
Yeah, here's my attempt at this one is so all that business is selling something in exchange for money. So in the case of your grandma, she'd probably understand like a physical thing because she probably values it a bit more is, oh, I can go and buy a coffee or a tea. And when I go to the store, I really need coffee. So I give someone $5 or $6 or whatever, and then they give me a coffee. And in the digital world, it's no different. So sometimes people even buy coffee online. So you could, contact a supplier, you could buy all this coffee, and then people could find you online on Twitter and you could say, hey, I sell like this awesome coffee that you can't buy at Superstore or at Walmart. And then they buy it, they send you money digitally, and then you mail them the coffee. So that would be like a similar thing. The way that it gets a bit crazier for guys like me is you start selling things that aren't physical at all. So I'm not selling coffee, I'm selling, social media growth, or I'm selling writing that I made that someone can post on social media to gain influence. So that's where it gets a little harder to understand. But at the core, it's just selling things in exchange for money.
Yeah, it's sort of like your unique recipe for your coffee. Online, you sell your unique process for making money or building a brand or things along those lines.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's almost powerful if you're able to explain it to the older generation, because if you're able to simplify it enough, like you just did, then the people that like the young kids in their 20s, if you then it'll be much easier to explain it to them if you can explain it to the older generation. So it's an interesting thought.
Mm-hmm.
Um, who would you say are the individuals who have had the most significant impact on your life and the person you are today?
This one's a tough one because I would say more recently, it's definitely like my co-founder Dale Perch and then Dakota Robertson because I spend the most time with the two of them. Like we've traveled together for 2 years. We've seen, the best and worst of each other. We've been there for each other during extremely hard times. Whenever we're going through stuff, those tend to be the two people that like I call and they help me work through things. And tough experiences are the things that really make you, and like that's where a lot of your change comes from. So considering that they're there consulting and helping me work through those tough experiences, I could argue that they probably shaped me the most. But then, like in terms of thought leaders who changed the way that I see the world, and then that ended up changing my action,
Yeah.
the biggest ones were probably Naval, Mark Manson, Jordan Peterson years ago before he got so political. Um, who else? Alex Hormozy more recently. A lot of his ideas that I think are really, really powerful and that have really shaped me as well. So maybe like those four would be like the most influential to understand the way that I think. And if you read everything by those four, you'd probably be able to be like, I could probably guess what Taylor thinks and believes.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I love listening to Jordan Peterson's old lectures like 5 or 6 years ago. I think those are gold. His lectures he used to give. just being able to articulate such complex ideas is inspiring. Something I want to be able to do someday, especially like on the podcast if I'm interviewing people, being able to articulate the way he does. I think he's probably the best person at articulating that I've ever seen. I don't know anyone that's maybe I've heard Douglas Murray is also very good, someone close to Jordan Peterson, but yeah. Um, how would you say those people that have impacted you have evolved during different stages of your life? Was there any people you looked up to when you were younger versus in your 20s versus now? How did that evolve?
Yeah, definitely, man. Maybe this one's a bit of a funny one. In my early 20s, I actually suffered from a lot of social anxiety. I struggled with talking to people, like strangers, especially. Conversations would hit dead ends. I didn't really know what to do. I was very nervous. So I learned a lot from Charisma on Command. I don't know if they're as popular of a YouTube channel now, but like back then, I consumed like everything of theirs. I was really struggling with women in my early 20s too, so I watched a lot of this guy, like How to Beast, I think it was called. Not
Mm,
Mr. Beast, but How to Beast.
yeah.
And it was more about masculinity and confidence and approaching women. This guy named Alpha M, who, like, really helped me a lot too from YouTube. I remember consuming tons of his stuff, and it was just like basic stuff like grooming, how to be more confident, like how to dress, and, just as I evolved as a person, I eventually stopped listening to those kinds of people. I'm like, oh, I think I've got the gist of it. Because what I've found with thought leaders, just anyone on social media, is they're just sharing their worldview of a narrow domain. And after a while, they're just recycling the same ideas, which I think is really cool. Like, I don't think this is a bad thing at all. Like, if you consume one person for like 6 to 9 months, like a lot of their content, you'll just start like not getting the same hits of dopamine because you're like, oh, I know that. Oh, I know that. Oh, I know that. Oh, I know that. And that's when you know it's time to move on to other people. It's like, okay, for the time being, I've learned what I need to learn from these people.
Yeah.
And it just evolves from there. So those people, like in the beginning, I eventually, on the dating side of things, found like Stefan Speaks and Matthew Hussey and Courtney Ryan, and kind of like went through them and just like learned more sophisticated things. And it just like snowballed, man. So that's how I ended up where I am here. But those it started very basic. Like I'm not, I didn't just dive into Jordan Peterson. I started with like, how do I brush my teeth the best? What do I wear?
Yeah, it's like the layers of purpose, like Maslow's hierarchy is you have to kind of go through the more shallow things first, brushing your teeth, how do you dress, and then get to more, I guess, more intellectual or deeper things, but I think all of it's important. I love what you said about
So true.
sort of listening to people until you don't get novel perspectives anymore. That's not something I've heard anybody say. It's interesting ideas. Like once you start listening to people and you're not getting novel perspectives or you're not getting shared novel perspectives like you used to, moving on. And I think looking back, like in 3 years, you might even find novel perspectives because you're a different person looking back at the same thing. I think I've heard that a lot with books. People will read the same book in 10 years and it hits them completely different than when they read it 10 years prior.
I would completely agree with that. The book has to come to the person at the right time. Or I think Naval even has an interesting one. It's like when the person is ready, the book appears. It's something like that. And I agree. The first time I ever read The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson, I actually like didn't like it. I read the whole thing start to finish and was just like, I don't really feel like I learned that much. And I put it down, and it was probably 3-ish years later. I was training for a half marathon during COVID and going through a really tough time in my life. And I was looking for a book to read on audiobook while I was running. So I ended up buying it and I listened to it and it just like blew my mind, which is so funny because I did not like it the first time. But then I was like, this is incredible. It's such complex philosophy told in like the most basic, fun to read, cheeky way. And I ended up reading the book 7 times back to back in a row. And it might be my most read book next to like the Almanac of Duvall. So like there's just some books that need to come to you at the right time. And for me, That one really hit me at that right time in my life. But there's also, I think, a negative to this that people don't talk about is you can actually miss being blown away by a book if you don't read it at the right time.
Hmm.
And that one for me is The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. So I had already read like 200 books by the time I read that one. And it had so much ideas that I had read from other books that it just wasn't novel to me by the time I read it, which actually sucks because for a lot of people, that's like the book. They're
Hmm.
like, this book like totally changed everything for me. Or for some people, it's Think Like a Monk, I think it's called by Jay Shetty.
Hmm.
That one for me too is like by the time I got around to reading it, I'd already read like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books, and it just wasn't novel. So some books that are kind of made for that entry level audience in a certain field, if you don't read them first, you never really get the chance to read them and be blown away. You have to instead read them and try to like extract little nuggets out of them and like maybe a different way of thinking about things that's kind of cool, but you don't get that massive paradigm shift. And I miss getting that the more I read. I miss just like getting my whole world flipped upside down.
Yeah, I love that. What would you say? Do you have a certain strategy for how you read books? I know Dan Coe has some like 5-step note taking method where you'll kind of have a perspective that pops out and then you answer questions about it. And then there's like Iman Gadzhi where he read a book every week for like 5 years when he was 15 or something like that. What would your strategy be for reading books if you could go back and now?
It depends on what you want out of it. So I used to read 1 or 2 books a week, and it's good for awareness and like width of knowledge, but you don't get really much depth because you're not practicing anything when you're reading that much. So I call it like passive learning. You're just like putting stuff in your subconscious mind that might come up later. You're like collecting ideas, but your like knowledge of them or true depth, true level of understanding isn't very high. But it can be cool for like having a novel for novel content. So there's a pro there. You'll just be writing and you're like, oh, this kind of reminds me of this random thing I read. Like maybe I should go like read up on that and write and add it to this idea. And that can be pretty cool. It can make you this like very interesting writer. But I, at this stage in my life, prefer more what I call active reading, where I try to only read things that are like directly applicable to what I'm doing and when I have skin in the game. So right now I'm reading 100 Million Leads by Alex Hormozy, and I feel like the amount that I remember or can like apply is like 10x if I just read like a book. Like if I just read a psychology book right now, I don't think I would be as invested in it because right now I'm solving like I want to increase leads in my business. So as I read the book, it's just so applicable. I can map it to experiences like, oh, I could try this here, I could try this here, I could try this here, I could try this here. Then I talk with my business partner, hey, this is what I learned from it. What do you think if we apply this? And the retention is way higher. So that's an approach that I prefer to take in terms of the types of books that I read and how many books is just what is most applicable to what I'm going through right now. And then as for Dan Coe's like note taking system, I do have one. It's not for books, it's for ideas. So it's if there's an idea that I find that I really like there was one from Dr. K I found the other day. It was called Idle Timing or Idle Time. And I put like, hey, what is it? So idle time is that you need time and space to process like underlying emotions. Otherwise, it just like negatively affects your thoughts and you distract yourself and your life kind of feel like you're getting chipped away at every day. And then it's like, hey, why is this important? It's like, and then I'll list all the reasons why. And then how would I say this is an analogy? As you said, to make it, apply to different groups of people, make it really simple. And then I would put, okay, what problems and pain like is this associated with? What benefits and goals is this associated with? What evidence is there that this is true? Is there scientific backing? What objections do people have to this? Why don't they like follow this idea? Why would they reject this idea? And then what contradictions of other things have I heard that contradict this? And that's me like sorting it through my own perspective. And usually by the time I've done all that, I can explain the idea in a different way than the person who explained it to me. And now it's like it's like through my perspective and it's
Yeah,
new again.
that's really powerful. Yeah. Definitely feel that when I'm reading books, sort of with that lens of trying to find novel perspectives, that I'll just have tons of ideas come to me that I can then
Mm.
look at and filter through my perspective and ask some similar questions to what you just named there. Two things from what you said. Do you think you have to do passive reading before active reading? Because the passive reading maybe sort of allows you to know what is actionable since you've already read so many books.
I don't think you need to passively read. I think you need more life experiences.
Mm.
Once you like life is kind of 80-20 in a lot of things, right? Like the Pareto principle. And you just got to know like what is the actual 20% that's going to get me to 80. But you don't tend to know that until you've actually like gotten in the world and tested knowledge. It's like the idea, like think about this, if you're passively reading all the time, but you're never challenging the theories, you don't really know what's going to work and you don't understand how to make things work.
Mm.
So you end up having all these ideas, but then when you go to apply it, you're still paralyzed. You're like, do I do this? Or like, okay, well, this didn't work, but like, what about this? Like, you want to be doing that on the fly because you don't want to become what I call an armchair intellectual, which I've definitely done this in the past with just reading so much. Is you keep reading and getting all this knowledge, but you are not being challenged on the knowledge or being forced to like actually think it through or find evidence for it. And if this goes on for like years and years and years and years, you become so disconnected from reality that your
Yep.
theories and your ideas are like so far off base that they're just totally insane. And you don't want to think that way. That's like a really inefficient model of the world to navigate it and to get results, like positive results in your life. Which is why I started that whole like system for filtering things through my own perspective was how can I like just challenge myself on the ideas and then when I go to apply them, and that's why I only really read things directly related to what I'm doing or if I'm extremely interested about something so I have skin in the game or just really curious and just making sure that I'm being challenged by like others and by myself, challenged to think them through. People respond on social media like I disagree with this, which is awesome. It's like, well, what is your objection? Because then I can think that through and get
Mhm.
more close to reality. So I think that's super important.
Yeah, that sort of reminds me of this idea from Atomic Habits that I just read. I think he calls it motion and action or something like that, where people will spend all of their time in motion, which is just planning and theorizing 10 steps ahead. And it's like when you do take the first step, you realize that step seven didn't matter, and then there's these three other steps that you didn't think about. So I definitely think, especially in the
Yeah.
beginning, action bias is super powerful. I think I heard this about Warren Buffett. This is like right now, action bias doesn't matter for him. He can spend most of his time thinking because he's taken a lot of action and also because he just needs to make one good decision and he increases his wealth by like 20%. And that's, I don't know how many billions of dollars, but a lot. But in
Yeah.
the beginning, the action bias is a lot more important. And
That's
another
very
thing
true.
there is like the leads book that you're reading. It reminds me of the right like the reading a book at the right time. Like right now, if I read that book, it would probably be good, but I don't really like. I'm not at that stage where I have the volume where leads are really a problem because I'm not even kind of monetizing in that way. I think
Hmm.
I think his offers book is more beginner in that way because if you're trying to sell something, it's good to have a good
Yeah.
offer. But his leads seems a little more advanced because I've like skimmed through it, but it seems that would be more applicable to where you are in your stage of business.
Yeah, it's so true. Both of the things you said are very true. Like action bias is important until you can actually take too much action in the wrong direction and pay a cost. So it's actually good until your opportunity costs are too high, is a way to
Mhm.
think about it. So like for me right now, I do need to take an insane amount of action, but I'm getting to the stage where I have to start thinking about opportunity cost. Like think about this. If I do market research and I build a product that people want, I could probably make like a couple hundred grand to $500,000 depending on the execution.
Yep.
But if I spent that same time and built a product that people don't want, I might waste all the time and then I'll lose a lot of that money and maybe I'll just make like 50 grand or something, which is still great. Like, don't get me wrong, 50 grand is like 50 grand. Like, that's awesome. But if it's like, oh, if I would have just built this thing, I could have made like 400 grand. Like that's a big decision, right? So once you have like those points of leverage, you got to slow down a little bit to make sure you're going in the right direction. So I like your point on action bias and just I was going to call it recency bias, but I think I'm just making that up. I don't know. With the books, it's so true. There's like, I just completely agree. I sat on 100 million leads. I've had it since for like a year. I haven't read it. And right now I'm like, oh, all these social media followers. And I wonder if I'm like getting the leads that I should be getting, or if I don't have enough lead flow. What would this book say? So
Mhm.
it's just right book, right time.
Yeah. I think another thing that makes action bias better in the beginning is that, like you said, there's lower risk. Like if you launched a bad product or a product that doesn't do as well, that might also lower your brand trust and your authority if you launch something that you don't execute on well. But if you launch a bad product in the beginning, there's no one really there to yeah, care.
Yes, that's so true. So true, man.
Um, what do you moving over to Twitter, what do you think changes for growth strategy as you grow on Twitter from 0 to 500 or 500 to 1,000? Those are arbitrary, but the different stages of Twitter growth.
Yeah. In the beginning, you definitely do have to do a lot more commenting because you just don't have much reach. And that by a first principles basis, whenever somebody asks me this question, I just think there's a distribution problem in the beginning. It's like, okay, well, even if your content's amazing and you have zero followers, like no one is going to see it. So we need to solve that first. Like this is applying what's called the theory of constraints, is what is like the biggest constraint on the business or on what you're trying to do. So the first constraint is distribution. There's no reach. So if you comment a ton, you can get a bunch of reach. Some people like to pay for retweets. It's against terms of service, but some people do it. That's just two ways to solve the distribution problem. So you start doing that, people start seeing your account, you start getting reach. Great. Well, now based on the reach, are you getting the engagement that you should be getting? So now it might be a content problem. And there's a lot of ways to solve the content problem. But typically for a small account, because people don't know who you are, you go through this model called curate, create, captivate. So first you like curate other people's perspectives. Like that's really what you're doing. It's, hey, here's someone that you care about, which is proof or credibility. Here's Jordan Peterson, we're talking about him. Here's Jordan Peterson's like best lectures, or here's some ideas from his like most viral lectures. You do something like that. And people are like, oh, I care about Jordan Peterson. And then because you're the one who's curating it, some of those people will follow you and you start out curating. But as you start to grow more, it becomes more important to filter things through your own perspective and to have your own take. And you want to start to create. That's really what that is. Oh, I learned this thing and then I applied it and I practiced it. And here's my new thoughts on it. And here's how it can help you. And that's when you start becoming a creator. And once you create at a high enough quality, you become like Dan Coe or Justin Welsh, where you become a captivator. And that tends to be how it evolves.
Yeah, that's so funny that you said it like that because in a newsletter that I wrote it as the four stages are imitation, curation, conscious creation, and then an innovator, which is sort of the same as a
Nice.
captivator, it sounds like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Cool.
And then yeah, that commenting definitely has been powerful for me. I remember I commented a lot in the beginning, like 100 a day, and my content would suffer. And then I was like, I'm not commenting anymore. I just want to focus on content. And that didn't really work either. My content got better, but I wasn't really getting that much engagement. And then recently, in the last week, I have kind of like a 30-minute thing where I will comment on people that comment on me and comment on people that are in an engagement group with me. And I think this is
Mhm.
sort of a theory I have that because I'm not at a large follower size, I mostly have to rely on reciprocity of I comment on somebody, they comment on me rather than authority. Like there's not a lot of people that have less followers than me. So for a bigger account to leave a comment on me is a little strange, but if it's reciprocity of me commenting on 1,000 follower account and they comment back, that makes more sense than like 20, like someone bigger than me commenting randomly. So once I'm bigger, I think I'll have more people commenting like normally.
Mm. Yeah, I would say that that makes sense. I've seen that be the case.
Yeah. And then it seems like to me in the beginning, commenting is what grows your top of funnel. And then once you've built a base audience, better content grows your top of funnel. Would that be accurate?
Yes, but you got to define what better content is.
Yeah.
I think of top of funnel as the first problem that you can solve. It's either that or entertainment. So I think you have to separate those two camps. Like entertainment is just, I want someone to feel something. It's like quick hits of dopamine or novelty or like, oh my God, wow. It's just like something that's like, just like, this is cool, you know? So some people do that, but usually in our side of things online, we're talking about education and education or like awareness of
Yeah.
problems. It's really just problem focused. It's here's a problem. If you're selling an info product, it's okay, here's how you can solve your own problem. Or if you're selling a service, here's how I'm positioned to solve your problem. Or if it's consulting, here's how I'm positioned to help you solve your problem. But there's just like still problems at the core, right? So
Mhm.
for growth, a lot of the best growth content speaks directly to the person that you want to help or the problem you want to solve for who. And it's just that has to be on the first problem. Like as you said about leads, if I'm just going to create a bunch of content on lead gen, you're not going to consume it because it's not the first problem. It's not the problem you're dealing with
Yeah.
right now. But if I create a bunch of like content around social media growth and like how to write better content, you might say, "Oh, like this is exactly what I need right now." And then the lead gen stuff becomes the back end content or the more sophisticated stuff for newsletters once you get there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's sort of like the levels of awareness. Like some people don't even know why writing on social media is important. So first you tell them 7 reasons you need to start a personal brand in 2024, and that because it'll
Yeah,
change your life or whatever the kind of way of getting people in. I feel like that's what Dan Coe does really well, is where you talked
yeah.
about like the definition of success, and he walks for 7 hours a day, writes, makes $400,000 a month and whatever. And his niche like product is writing, and that's the key to all of that. And he can write a hook like how writing allows you to make $400,000 a month as one person. Like who doesn't want that?
So true, so true. Great problem awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on waiting to write a newsletter until you have amassed a decent size or good size email list, which isn't really specific, but could depend on the account size, versus writing a newsletter when you have a small email list or like you're just starting out?
The newsletter list, I have a different take with it. I think it depends on when you can do it at quality and when you have the bandwidth. So if you're starting out, you're a student or you're also working a 9 to 5 and you're like struggling to even just write social media content for Twitter or whatever, doing a newsletter is probably going to hurt you because you need to get better at the Twitter content. You need to have a system for that. And you'd also be trying to learn newsletter and social media. It's a tough game. So once you have the time and you're like, okay, this the Twitter content's going good, I need to funnel to something, then you solve the newsletter problem. You learn how to write newsletters because it is a different format to write and to do it well. It's a totally different game.
What do you think of the idea of being able to write one newsletter and then creating your content for the week based on that?
Yeah, it's great, especially if you do it with like write the newsletter with that in mind, because then you might actually kind of like focus on writing tweets and whatnot within it,
Hmm.
which can be really good. Some weeks for me, I find it works better than others, depending on the newsletter and the style. But I think it's good. It can at least get like a good chunk of your content done. But you might have to like rewrite a little bit of the stuff you pull from the newsletter and not have it 1 to 1. But yeah, it can work.
Yeah, I think something else that might be powerful about just kind of writing a newsletter if you can is that when you do say have 2000 email subscribers, you don't write your first newsletter to them, and then it's probably not that great because you haven't gotten the reps in of writing prior, versus sort of like that thing we talked about where the risk is lower if you have a smaller following, because if you have 50 people and 20% or like 5% unsubscribe, it's like 5 people. But if it's 2000 people, it's a bigger risk.
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I agree. The only caveat is like you do got to start getting good at newsletters at some point, just practicing. But maybe it's good to even just practice and not publish. Some people
Mhm.
disagree and they're like, you already wrote it, you should publish. But there it's there's just so much content out there. So I actually fundamentally disagree with this sometimes, is to just write stuff for the sake of writing it and saying, hey, I'm just learning, but like, hey, I'm just going to share with you something that isn't good.
Mm.
I don't always think that's the best approach. Sometimes it might be good to actually practice a little bit, send it to your friends, get some like feedback, take some courses or get some good frameworks and at least get like 60% of the way there before you publish. Because, some people might follow you, they might read that first newsletter and just be like, this sucks. And you can always just win over other people. I don't want to say you have to win over everyone, but I think people nowadays are a little too quick to just like publish something for the sake of publishing. And that works in a market where we don't have too much information. I don't
Yeah.
know how effective that is in a market where there's just so much stuff.
Yeah. I love that. That makes a lot of sense. Definitely, my dad, when he writes his newsletters, he loves it. And he just spends like a month sometimes or 2 months just writing his newsletter because he just likes writing
Nice.
that act. And I think a lot of people are almost just doing it as like a finite game, just like I need to get one out a week rather than focusing on the craft of writing good newsletter. And I definitely agree with there's so much content now. No one owes you to read like your newsletter because there's so many other things for people to read at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I love the tip too from John Brosio. Don't publish your newsletters on the days that the big guys publish their newsletters because they're not going to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a certain strategy when it comes to growing your newsletter and writing your newsletter?
I take a bit of a different approach to it, but here's a few things that I would recommend to people. I think lead magnets are better at driving subs than just saying I have a newsletter.
Yeah.
Definitely. And a good lead magnet just solves a narrow problem for one person. So you can, if you think about it that way, you could create a couple different lead magnets and you can cycle them. So that'd be the first thing. The second one is I like to publish my newsletters to a blog, and then instead of plugging the newsletters, or instead of plugging the like, hey, sign up to my newsletter. Sometimes if there's a relevant blog post,
Yeah.
I'll just say, hey, like I wrote about this on my blog, probably promise a benefit, or to like avoid pain or problem. Like check this out. And my goal is just time under attention and connection. I want more people to read like a lot longer form content of mine and connect with it and reach out to me and have us like chat about the ideas. So I like the idea of every newsletter not just being a one and done, but it actually being stuff that gets like posted often on social media.
Yeah. I love that. I think it's that someone needs 7 hours with you before they buy from you or something. They need to be 7 hours under their attention. I think is
Yeah.
the metric or something like that. I don't know if that's true, but it means that people need to be with you a good amount of time. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
these are some questions from people that commented from Twitter. What does your typical day look like, and do they vary?
Yes, they do vary. So there's two types of days for me. There's the Wednesday and the Thursday, which are where I do almost all my calls. So I woke up, it's like 7:47 a.m. here. I'm on this call with you, and then I'm in calls until like 2 p.m. straight, which I don't always like to do back to backs like that, but I would prefer 2 days of back to backs like that, where it's like a full day of calls, than to have them like scattered throughout my week.
Mhm.
So that this is like my call day. I sometimes write content in the evenings or work on product. Sometimes I don't do any writing on these days. It's like they're kind of like my weekends, the calls only. And then on the other days, it tends to be like wake up and just get like right to work. I like to get up and just write or create product. So it's either content or products, something that really is like needs my full attention. And then there's a break. I'll sometimes go for a walk, sometimes hit the gym, depends if I'm traveling. And then after that, it tends to be more administrative stuff. And then I might write a little bit more in the evening, but it's not as like feverish. And
Yeah.
that if I'm not traveling, that tends to be what it looks like. If I'm traveling, sometimes it gets a little chaotic depending on how much I'm traveling.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I have basically the same sort of idea for the. I think I text or message you on Telegram when I was setting up my schedule, and that's how I sort of ended up setting it up. Tuesday and Thursday, I do this thing called 1 month day. I don't know if you've heard of it from Rian Doris, and I do that. It's like 11 hours of deep work, and he sets it up in a way where you have recovery and things like that. So Tuesday, I try to get all my content done, and then Thursday is sort of building, and then the rest of the week is more calls and things like that. And I think something else about calls is having one day where you're completely open helps with the issue of time zones rather than being available from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. every day. It's like some people just won't be able to be with you ever because they are in a completely different time zone.
Totally agree, man. Yeah, the time zone stuff gets pretty weird. And yeah, I like that. I never heard about that concept. That's pretty cool. Making me rethink my strategy a little bit.
Mhm.
But I do something similar where on the weekends is tends to be when I write my content. So I guess I don't really have weekends. But on either Saturday or Sunday, I like to try to do a week of content in a day, but it's become so much harder. Now that I do newsletter and Twitter and LinkedIn is like a pretty heavy lift if you do it right, is so much more content than writing for Twitter. People say
Yeah.
repurpose one for one, doesn't work. Tried it, it just flops all the LinkedIn content. So it ends up being like a totally separate lift. So it can be challenging to do it all in a day or two, but I try.
Yeah. For my content, I mainly right now I'm just focused on Twitter and YouTube. So I'll write a newsletter and then I'm only writing long form content right now because I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't like scheduling tweets for some reason. I rather write long form threads or actual long form. And then the newsletter that I wrote, I'll try to turn into a YouTube video, which I'm learning how to do.
Nice.
It's difficult. Speaking to the camera is
Yeah,
strange, but yeah.
definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
this one is from Vigo. Is what would your advice be to younger creators and entrepreneurs like Vigo and me, or Vigo and I?
Um, what's an answer I have that isn't trite? The first one that came to mind is just skill stack. Like that's the main thing is, markets change, opportunities change. So adaptability seems like the biggest thing to me is if you can learn, how to get leads, craft offers, learn to market, learn to sell, learn to build, which is kind of, again, it's trite. It's like an evolism, Coase said it, but it's so true. You just want to be adaptable. You want to develop these skills that allow you to win regardless of domain. Because a lot of businesses, there are evergreen ones, but a lot of them come with windows of opportunity where there's a very short amount of time to make a lot of money if you're positioned to win with the skills. So you want to have the skills, you want to stack the skills, and then you want to start looking for windows of opportunity that you're uniquely positioned to win. And then when you have it, whether it's like 3 months, 6 months, a year, you want to just like full like right foot on the gas, just crank that window of opportunity out and make as much money as you can, and then you want to look for the next one. So
Yeah.
that's what I would say: skill stack, and then look for windows of opportunity.
And would you say being able to transfer skills across different domains, like the skills you learned from growing on Twitter, applying them to another platform if there's another platform that's better for growth in that window?
Yes, yeah, that's a huge skill in itself. You could say it's a meta skill of basically understanding first principles.
Yeah. Um, for personal brand, would you change anything about growing your personal brand and building your digital identity?
Yes and no. It's a very hard question to answer because on one side of things, yes. Like obviously there's mistakes I've made. There's a lot of windows of opportunity that I just never capitalized on. Like I've actually never shared this. I built a writing product for fun before Kieran Drew did high impact writing. I just never released it. I still have never released it. But I had a writing product done. Digital identity was like the idea of it was conceptualized and a lot of it was built 7 months before I ever released it. It was just like sitting there. And I was like, I'm busy with ghostwriting. Like a lot of the mistakes I made were just not having like the action bias. and just not capitalizing on things soon enough. So that would be like an absolute massive one. But now I'm more aware of it, and now I do it because I felt the pain of not doing it. So I'd say that's a big one, and just also not understanding growth content versus like where the middle of funnel content is, and that it's those like front facing problems and identifying those. That would be another really big thing if I could go back that I would change. Is I've always done like more sophisticated content because I enjoy it more, but I could definitely benefit from doing more like growth based content on my accounts.
I love that. Um, you built a you built digital identity and you built some other products, free products like your educational email course. What would you say has been your favorite product to build and why?
It's one's in beta. It was the community that I created has been my absolute favorite one. Community is kind of like a hot topic right now, I think, because of Hermosi. But the truth is, behind the scenes, like most people hate community. Like the people that do it, like hate running them. They don't like managing the members. They don't like showing up every day. I actually love the community. It's awesome. I love building for it. I love thinking about ways to improve it. I love engaging with the members every week. We become like a group of friends who have met almost every week since last September, which is crazy. Like it's
Yeah,
just the same people. We all grow together. We talk strategies. We share stuff. We all have different strengths and like weaknesses. Some of us are more data driven. Others are really great at hooks, and we just support each other. And it makes the journey so freaking fun.
that's awesome.
Like I absolutely love it, man. So that's been my favorite product, like by a landslide. And I'm gonna be launching it publicly in probably like a month and a half, and I'm super excited to see what people think of it because I've put a lot of work into trying to differentiate it from other people's communities and make it a way better experience. So we'll see how effectively I pull that off.
That's awesome. It sort of sounds like it's a mastermind, that mastermind principle. It's that's
It
something I'm trying to figure out how to do because it's so powerful. And everyone that's successful seems to have done it.
definitely, yeah, it's definitely a big mastermind thing, looking for areas where we can just attract amazing people and support each other.
As a former school teacher, do you plan to contribute to destroying or reforming the education system in the future or no?
Um, I don't know. I'd say it's like an active goal of mine, but I'm like aware that I'm a part of that. I do think that college and university has just gotten way too expensive. And on a more practical side of things, like basically pay locking a degree behind like all these extra courses that don't really have much to do with the degree itself, I actually think should be illegal. It just seems so disgusting that a business is allowed to inflate costs and do that. So I think decentralized education is just the natural progression of what's going to happen when you get universities that start to do things like this.
Yeah,
So I'm excited to play maybe like some role in it over like the long time horizon. It's hard to say, how much of a hand I'll play in it. Kind of like Hermosi's like really going in on it. We'll wait and see how things evolve. But yeah, it's exciting. I like providing alternate education. It's definitely something like meaningful to me.
maybe someday you'll start Simmons University.
Maybe you never know.
Um, If for the future of your personal brand, do you want to grow a larger presence such as Danco or Alex Hormozy, or do you plan to remain smaller and more of a micro authority?
I wouldn't be opposed to growing bigger. I would definitely need to like upgrade my skills, and that's how I think about it. Is just what's the next thing I need to do, the next system, the next thing I have to get good at. And as I continue to do that, I guess we'll see how big it goes. I'll say I'm becoming more aware of like what it really takes to get to that stage the more I'm in the game and I see the people who are at that stage. Like I'm being coached by Dan Co. There's some people on LinkedIn who are like really crushing it and I see what they actually do. And it's pretty insane to like see what actually goes into it.
Yeah,
So I would say it's just all about leveling up as a person. And as I continue to level up, we'll see where those skills and where that my ambition allows me to go.
yeah, I love that. It's got a similar answer from some of my guests of sort of whatever is needed in the next stage of the journey, not trying to plan like so far out. It's whatever is needed for what like it evolves. You can't, it's kind of seems unrealistic to know exactly what you want right now, especially since
Yeah,
I mean, it's crazy to think you've only been in the game for maybe 2 to 3 years, I guess, right?
about two, almost 2.5. Actually, it's June. 2.5. Yeah, 2.5 years.
It's crazy what's possible. I think you'll like this question. This is the last question. What are your thoughts slash experiences with the statement that men aren't born valuable and must earn it?
I agree with it. I've written about it a little bit, but not from like the same red pillish idea. But I will say that as a man, my life in my 30s versus my life in my 20s is a completely different life. The way that people look at me, the way they talk to me, the way that like women look at me and the opportunities I have with women is vastly different than when I was in my early 20s. And that comes with just developing more competence. So I completely agree that we make our own value, we build ourselves up. And as you get older, for any guy who's in his early 20s, I've been there, I've been overweight, struggled to talk to people, been invisible. And if you just work super hard and stack skills one at a time, like you'll just be surprised like how valuable you can become to like a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's totally possible. People will see you as a different person. Your life will change.
I feel like it's almost frustrating but empowering in the same way because it means you can create your own life. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Be grateful, We get to create that and then we get to be proud of it. So
Yeah.
it's awesome.
Well, thank you for coming on, Taylin. That was awesome. Maybe you'll come on another time, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate this, man. Later.